so we're up to the 28th. Hashmona Vesrim, the 28th remembrance. Oh, Kuf Lamed Tes. Hashmona Vesrim sheyiskor misha noisen beisoy la'adam b'matana gemura. He should remember that if, for example, a person were to give him a house entirely free as a gift, and the recipient wants to reduce the house to rubbles and rebuild it according to his will, his desire. The one who gives the house can't prevent him from doing so. He's given him the house. Here's your house. Here's the house. It's yours. All right, well, I'm going to tear it down and rebuild it. The one who gave it, it's too late. He gave it. So a person should give over, as it were, himself, his wife, his children, and all of his belongings to God. And therefore everything is, as it were, given by him to God as a gift. I mean, it's really the other way around, but since from the outset he turned himself over entirely into the hands of God, that was an expression of his putting his faith and his trust in God. And from the outset he accepted in his heart to accept whatever God decides. Whatever God decides. And even if Hashem did not send evil, bad, not on his body, nor on his money, nor on his children, nor on his wife, this 28th one is, I think, a little more like indirect and kind of obtuse, but basically I think what he's saying is, if somebody gives something over to somebody else, clearly once he's given it over, he has no real say over what the person does with it. And if the example he gives, for example, somebody gives somebody a house and the person decides he wants to tear down the house and rebuild it, the original owner of the house can't say, hey, I object to you doing that. I didn't give it to you for that purpose. You didn't stipulate. You gave it to me unconditionally with no condition. It's now mine. I do what I want with it. And he's forced to accept that. Otherwise he would have made a condition. He made no condition. So with anything that a person has, anything that he considers to be valuable in his life, he should view it as if he's giving it over to Hashem, even though everything he has, of course, comes from God. But the point is, he is giving over insofar as he is expressing his understanding that everything that he has is really, since it's given by God ultimately, it's actually the running or the controlling or what happens to those things are also in the hand of God. And therefore that's as if he's basically giving over, relinquishing, as it were, his control over these things in the hands of God. So that if anything happens to himself or to his loved ones or to his possessions, he really can't say anything about this because he's already relinquished control over these things to God. He should know that it comes from God and it is in God's control, so it's not so much a matter of his relinquishing. But the point is, when one accepts the fact that everything is given by God and ultimately God controls everything, so that in a way is relinquishing any claims, whether they're false or not, to his having ownership or control over these things and admitting that they're coming from God. Now, even if nothing actually bad happens, he's still going to get rewarded for the fact that he expressed this faith and trust in God, that the acknowledgement that everything comes from God and the running of everything in his life also comes from God. But he should also be willing, if God forbid anything happens, which would seem harmful to him or to his loved ones, he should say, well, that's why I gave over my faith and my trust in God. Because I recognize that ultimately he is most qualified to make the right decision about what should be done to whom, at what time, and for what reason. In the wording of the analogy, it's as if he's using the analogy of somebody who gives something over to somebody else. But here, I translated that more in terms of relinquishing. He's relinquishing, as it were, what a person might claim to be his ownership and control over things, admitting that no, God is things are in God's ownership and in His control, such that when one does that, one should remember that should be his approach, his attitude towards the things that happens, the things that he has, that he's basically relinquishing them to God, so that ultimately everything that happens comes from God, and God has a right to do what He sees fit, and I can't complain about that, my having relinquished, as it were, my control over these things. The reason being, from my relinquishing it, because I recognize that ultimately it is His, it comes from Him, and He decides what to do with it, and how and when, and so forth and so on.
What's your rights to it? You own it.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. In truth, you don't own. I'm saying, from the Jewish theological point of view, in truth, you don't own your house. God gave it to you.
Online. Yeah.
What?
Online.
Yeah. So if you talk about giving it to God, you're not really. It's not yours that you give it to God, but actually you're relinquishing what you might think to be you think it to be your house. And you're recognizing that in fact it's not, it's God's. So now that you've relinquished it, as it were, to God, so anything that happens to the house, you realize that God has the right to, it's an analogy. God has the right, as it were, to do whatever He wants with the house. Because you've relinquished your control over it. But of course, that's not the point. God owns it and controls it whether you relinquish it or not. But the point is just from your point of view. Once you recognize that God has ownership and control over everything, then you have no right to complain when things don't happen the way you'd like them to. You have to you've relinquished, as it were, a right to voice an opinion about what should or should not be done, by recognizing it comes from God.
An opinion you didn't even have anyway.
Yeah, right.
It makes sense.
Yeah, but it's
just because you know that it would happen either way. It's more you.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that the language here, or the idea, is maybe a bit convoluted. But I think that's ultimately the point. A person has no right to complain in the first place, whether he understands or he doesn't. But the point is, certainly one who has gone through the mental process of accepting the fact that everything he has comes from God, and God ultimately decides what and to whom and when to give. So ultimately, whatever happens afterwards is really, I have no complaint. You can't have any complaint. Not that one who wouldn't relinquish would have a complaint. Of course not. So remember, the bottom line, at least according to what I understand from this, is that we are required to remember that everything that we have is given by God, it's under the control of God, and therefore anything happens, right, we should accept for the best, because it comes from God. That's what I'm getting from this. HaTisha V'Esrim, the 29th. She'yizkor v'yizbonen al bnei Adam, he should contemplate people. V'yirei sheyesh adam echad shakul kamea, you have one person who is equivalent to 100. Vein ze mechmas aguf, it's not because of his body. Ele mechmas tivunasoi v'chachmasoi v'tzidkasoi, because of his understanding, his wisdom, and his righteousness. Lechen titaken nishmasacha, such a person can help you correct your soul. Ki kol ha'ma'alos hen mimena, because all of the good degrees, all of the good attributes, they all come from it, from the soul. Because if a person was, let's say, healthy and attractive, lo haya shave klum, it wouldn't be worth anything if he was a fool, if he was an idiot. But if you had a person who is, let's say, ugly, weak, but he's exceptionally wise, he ultimately would be raised to importance. Yeah, certainly, a strong physique and good looks can take a person a long way. But if he's vacuous and there's nothing in him, he's just empty, he's not going to get very far. On the other hand, certainly being, let's say, weak and unattractive are impediments. But if a person is exceptionally intelligent, ultimately that will enable him to to be recognized as a leader and elevated above others. A person can be both, very intelligent and also physically attractive. I suppose most world leaders, have some combination thereof, although that's not always the case. But you think about Napoleon. I don't think he was particularly physically impressive, but he led a world empire. An empire, tremendous conquest over Europe. Same thing, Ymach Shemo of Hitler. He wasn't particularly impressive, physically speaking. I don't know how intelligent he was, but or wasn't. I don't know. He wasn't.
He wasn't like.
He's a man.
Yeah.
He spoke like a peasant.
He spoke like a peasant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that might have been part of his appeal to the masses. But he in terms of but in any case, you find, even Jewish sources talk about Pharaoh, who certainly was the head of the leading world empire at that time, as being a midget. And so my point is just that you see that people who are not, you've had plenty of examples where people who are not particularly physically impressive, they don't have the most impressive physiques, still can lead nations and conquer nations. A person should remember that it's the internal traits which are most important, wisdom and understanding, and not the physical traits. Hashloshim, the 30th. Sheyizkor, im adam ba el eretz nochriya. If a person comes to a foreign land, v'lo hikir shum adam ve'in shum adam mekira. He doesn't know anybody, nobody knows him. V'chomal alav adoin medina v'nasan noi mezoyne v'chol yom v'yom. And he had mercy upon him, the leader of the land, and took care of his needs on a daily basis. He just said, listen, I'm taking care of you, but you must remain loyal. And he told him in advance of his reward for his faithfulness, his good service. I think it means he also told him that at some point he'd have to leave, but he didn't tell him when. This person has become like a servant. He's under the tutelage of the land, of the leader of the land. He should submit himself and to cast away his haughtiness, his arrogance. And he should investigate into the ways of serving the king in order to do so and fulfill his desire. And he should also feel brotherly love towards strangers like himself. And he would also try and increase his service for the betterment of the town, of the city. Because he's got no one else to take care of his needs. So too a person is like a stranger in the world. And when it gets time to leave this world, if the entire world tried to, let's say, postpone his passing on, or make it earlier, or get hold of him, hold him back, they couldn't do so. We can tie a rope around his leg, his ankle, and keep him from passing on. Can't do that. When time comes, it comes. And then also, when he leaves the world, nobody in the world could possibly take care of his needs aside from Hashem. God is the only one who has no peer. Ki im adonov shiach malav uhu baroi v'hu hayochid shein lo chaver. I think he's referring to the person. He's like the single one. He has got no friend. Ki im adonov, other than his master. Shiach malav v'hu baroi. In other words, just like this person who is a stranger in a strange land and doesn't know anybody and doesn't receive any interaction from anybody. Rather, he's taken in by the goodness of the king, let's say, for example. He would certainly want and make every effort to know what the king's desires are and to do them to benefit the kingdom, even though he knows that the king said this is not going to last forever. I will give you, I'll grant you entry for a certain amount of time, but there's going to be a point I'm going to have to expel you, I'm going to have to turn you out, have to turn you back. As long as he's being cared for, he has to feel an allegiance, even though he knows at some point it's going to come to an end. But he is receiving now benefit, and therefore he has to act in a way which demonstrates his allegiance. So too, a person should remember that this is the same thing here as well, that a person is brought into this world, he's sustained only by God, even though he knows it's not going to last forever. While he's here, he should be grateful and also find ways to increase the honor of the king, God, and to do his will. And it has absolutely nothing to do with anybody else about when he comes or when he goes. And even after he leaves, nobody can do anything to help him other than Hashem himself. And so these are all things that we should remember. What should we remember then to summarize? The 30th one, we should remember that we are sojourners. We are visitors here. And all that entails. Being thankful to the host, recognizing that it lasts forever. The analogy doesn't seem to be entirely complete, because it would seem to me that even though a person passes on, people who are still living in this world can do things to benefit that person's soul, like charity in his honor, saying Kaddish in his memory, doing other types of mitzvahs and for his best spiritual benefit, and setting up funds and so forth and so on. And he himself can set up these things before he goes, so that he continues to accrue benefit even though he's passed on. But still, in terms of the actual, let's say, eternal quality of the soul, the fact that it has any continued existence after life in this world is coming from Hashem. Hashem is sustaining the soul itself. Even if a person might be able to make provisions to provide for himself once he's gone, or those who he leaves behind might also help support him along the way. But ultimately, in terms of the life, meaning the existence of the soul, is dependent entirely on Hashem. Okay, so that finishes the list of 30 things. Twice a day. Hine hishlamnu shloshim dvarim sheyizkor adam tamid. We have completed the 30 things that a person should remember continually. V'anachnu hiskarnu isam b'derech tzara. And we only mentioned them briefly. V'kol echad yosif lahamik behem kefi chochmaso. Each person is encouraged to deepen his understanding of them according to his abilities. V'yilmad mehem kol midos tovos. And he should learn from these 30 things all good attributes. Achamudos v'hazakos, which are pleasant and which are pure. V'hem mizakachos hanafashos, and they purify the souls. Lihisyapos mishahariyason, to clean them from their sulliness. V'sihiyeh zoriz yoser lezocham, he should be very quick to remember them. And when you do so, there will be renewed within you a force which until now you had not known. A person should recall these remembrances always, at every hour and at every moment. He should recall them in each of his breaths. Not just twice a day, but all the time as he's breathing, you should remember all of these things. So that there should not be removed from him the fear of God and the embarrassment and the humility before God, who sees him always at all times. Go see how God commanded the king. The Chsiv is written on Kuf Mem Aleph at the top. Third line, in parentheses, in quotation signs. Write for you this teaching of the Torah, al sefer in a book in front of, before the prophets and the Levites. And it shall be there for him, and he'll read it all the days of his life. And it is written, this Torah shall not be removed from your mouth, and you'll be engaged from it day and night. So if this is true regarding the Torah, a king has to know the Torah and keep it in front of all of the time. And furthermore it says, these matters shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them to your children, you will speak of them. You're sitting in your house, you're going on the way. And you're lying down, and you're waking up. Tie them as a sign on your arm. They shall be as like a remembrance before your eyes. And you shall write them, so forth and so on. And furthermore, this matter is even strengthened in the mitzvah of tzitzis, about which is written, you see from these sources, it is a mitzvah to remember God at all times. And it's furthermore written, you should be careful that at all of your times, your clothing is clean, not sullied. So you see that if God is warning us to keep the Torah like this constantly in front of us, meaning, well, in front of the king, then certainly these 30 things, I think that's what he's saying, these 30 things which distill for us the major teachings and the ideas of the Torah are something which every person should have in his mind and have before him at all times. That's probably why, it's worth having that list, so you can quickly refer to it when you want. Consider how this attribute of memory, remembering, is so great. Through which a person can remember all of the good attributes. You have to have a good memory to remember all of these 30 things. But see how powerful a tool memory is. It enables you to remember these things. If it weren't for this remembering, he would forget everything. And it would be like an empty nincompoop. Therefore one should strengthen oneself with his ability, regarding his ability to remember. More so than all of the other attributes, because through remembering he's able to remember all of the attributes. This is a very important tool to remember, to acquire all the other attributes. To recall always this book, the book he's writing here, or at least the book that he's written as a synopsis of the 30 things. He'll also remember the bad attributes, and he will recoil from them. He should at least review these things once a week. Thursday afternoon, just before Shabbos, right? Pull out your list of 30 things. V'simone kalale hamidos haksuvim b'techilas hasefer yachzor b'chol pa'am. The index of the general attributes, which are written at the beginning of the book, yachzor b'chol pa'am, go through them all the time. I guess it means this. Yeah. Just to remember, oh yes, I have to work on this, avoid that, work on this, avoid that, and the couples, so forth and so on. Kas, Rotza, and Kina. V'yivdok atzmo tomid im kitzer l'kayim midos, and he should constantly checking himself to see if he falls short of fulfilling these attributes. Ad she'erogel l'kayim kol midos atovos sheba, until, as a result of constantly remembering and checking to see whether he is fulfilling, he will ultimately be able to do all of these things, acquire all of these good attributes. So memory is a very important thing. It's interesting that you start to kind of lose it as you get older. You should remember the bad things. Yeah, but as a person gets older, you should remember all of these things because of where you're going. The person starts to forget, the unimportant details, so that he's no longer distracted, perhaps. by the relatively small and unimportant mundane things in life. Maybe. Da'alecha, he says, you shall know. Sheschira mivi l'dei asiyah. These remembrances bring a person to actually doing and performing, as it says, uschartem v'asizem. You shall remember and you shall do. If you don't remember what you're supposed to do, then how are you going to do it? A prerequisite for doing it is keeping in mind what it is that you're supposed to do, what it is that your objectives that you want to get done. So you have to remember. What did I want to do? I can't remember for the life of me what I was going to do. What was I going to do? So you get into, it's debilitating. Oh my gosh, well, better start making a list of things to do. Otherwise, what would I do? Yeah. So, but when you have a list, you got to remember. If you can't remember, you write it down, and then you proceed accordingly. And this way, you get things done. A mental list or a written list, but you got to know what you got to do in order to do it. Umihu ba'al malachtecha. L'chen hizir amidas eschira. Hizar liskor kol mitzvah v'mitzvah l'shem mi she'ta'asena. Also remember each and every mitzvah, and also before whom you're supposed to do it. Umihu ba'al malachtecha. And you should also know who your boss is. V'zar adam me'od shelo yiskor es chavero she'oso lo davar ra. He should be careful, however, not to remember the bad things that people have done to him. Like you said, you don't remember the bad things. V'alzei nemar, regarding this, it says, Lo yisitor, you shall not remember or recall, meaning don't recall to yourself the way in which a person might have harmed you. Well, you didn't loan me your object, so I'm not going to loan you mine. No, you should forget that part of things. Ela yishkach melibo kol sina, he should cause to be forgotten from his heart any hatred, any animosity. Vimhu hera lechavero, but if he, on the other hand, mistreated somebody else, yiskor, that he should remember. Kadeshi Saken Mashi Osalo, in order to correct that what he did wrong to him. So what people do wrong to you, you should forget. How you've wronged other people, you shouldn't forget. It's kind of like we spoke the other day about not being so meticulous. In other words, cut people slack and give them the better portion. So here as well, don't hold them accountable for the way they've harmed you. Overlook that. If you want to hold somebody accountable for doing wrong, hold yourself accountable for the way you've wronged them. If you heard useless things, lo yiskarem, you shouldn't remember them. Why? You have a certain number of brain cells available to you for remembering. Yeah, and as you get older, you start to realize painfully how limited they really are. So it's a shame to waste them by remembering baseball statistics. You've got to delete that. Yeah, and by remembering lyrics from Bob Marley songs, delete that. Yeah, you need that space in your hard drive. You've got to free the hard drive. Yeah. Ach ye kanofa akoletes, rather a person should be like a sieve or a sifter, kanafa. He should be like a nafa, which is a sieve, a sifter. Hakoletes is a soles, which retains the good germ, the wheat germ and the like. V'motzia es kemach, and lets the floury, more inferior stuff go out. Avalo kemishameres shekoletes et ashmorim v'motzia seyayin, and not like a drain cloth, which is basically kind of like a net, which would collect the dross from the wine and let the wine pass through. I mean, of course, that's our purpose. When we strain the wine, you want to collect, but don't be like that strainer that collects the garbage and lets the good stuff go through. Rather be like the sifter, which collects the good stuff and lets the bad stuff through. That's what we should be like. Okay, very good. So we have now just about 2 minutes. So since it's the end of the week, the end of a chapter, and we're not going to have time to make much ground on the new one, let's stop here. And next time we'll meet, we'll do the small section on forgetfulness.